All right, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the PE Geek podcast. And as always, it's a pleasure to have you here, and I'm super excited to welcome back Carl Condliffe, who's joining us from New Zealand, and it's his second time on the show. He was with us in episode 81, talking about flipped learning, and here's just another chance for us to catch up and talk all about that amazing world. How's things?
Things are good, Jared. Thanks for having me on again. It's really interesting times here in New Zealand. We're starting to ramp up things around this pandemic. So it is an interesting world we find ourselves in right now.
For sure. So in your, like the last few years since we spoke, I think there's been a lot of changes, the sort of things that you're doing in terms of education space and some of the leadership stuff that you've stepped into. And, it's pretty exciting times. But if we had to sort of paint a picture, I think I'm going to go out there and say that you teach the world's biggest phys ed class. Would that possibly be true?
That could possibly be true. I think it'd be right up there in terms of, we've put through on my study series maybe 30,000 kids. Top two, surely top two.
Yeah, awesome.
I think the Everlearner have quite a few phys ed students on their platform as well.
Yeah, amazing. So, for context, what is like the My Study Series platform? And in a nutshell, what is it about doing and how does it help students?
So my study series is basically an online platform that provides access to targeted video content in relation to the achievement standards that our students sit. And then what we also have on there is automated quizzing to check student understanding and data that the teacher can then take and use that to kind of get some idea about how their students are progressing. And the whole purpose behind it is to allow a teacher to repurpose their classroom space so that instead of chalking and talking and standing up the front, we know their students have consumed the data outside of the classroom, so they can then be more active and have more meaningful learning experiences in the classroom.
Yeah, nice. So, this is quite pioneering stuff, really. And it traces right back to your origin when you did those first videos, I think probably on YouTube, and doing some screen recording and placing it up there. And the idea was that students could watch that video, and then there was the opportunity for you in your classroom to be doing something different. You didn't have that content. You didn't have to use the content in the classroom only. So it's come a long way since then, but we've sort of come back to this now because of the time that we're in, and a lot of schools looking at providing sort of learning environments for their students outside of the walls of their school. And leaning on you for that, like what do you think the biggest ingredients are for a successful learning environment where the teachers might not be seeing them face to face?
Well, it's a really challenging one, and I think there needs to be a couple of considerations there. We need to be thinking about what the immediate challenges are, but we also need to be balancing that and thinking about what those opportunities that this presents are, because there are a lot of opportunities. But if you're going to talk about like challenges, if there's access, how do kids access, there's the workload for the teacher and the student, access to the right tools, considering student well-being. So there's all those challenges. But if we park that for a second and forget about, some of the challenges, and look at, what is going to help us be successful in the classroom, I like to kind of think of it in terms of a learning week. Let's say you're going into a remote environment or an online learning environment where you can't access your classroom and your kids are completely online. There's a couple of things that I think are going to make that experience really successful. And I think the first thing is we need to have really clear student guidelines and expectations. And that might come from the top down. That might be from your principal or your senior leadership team. Whoever, doesn't matter who it is, there needs to be some clear guidelines, because we've got to think, our students might have 5 or 6 teachers. That's 5 or 6 different educators providing content in probably completely different ways. And the clearer we can be on those guidelines and those expectations, both of the teacher and the student, then the better experience we're going to give that kid, and they're more inclined to succeed in that environment. I think the second thing is having clear learning outcomes and success criteria. So at the start of the week, the student knows exactly what the outcomes are, and with that success criteria, they know what they need to do to get there. And when you can be clear on that, and a child or a student sits down at the start of the week and says, I know that I need to do A, B, C, and D, and this is what success looks like over here, then they're going to be successful. One thing I've been encouraging educators to do is to get comfortable in front of a camera, and that's really hard. You know, I've filmed thousands of videos, and still I sit there recording myself going, "You look like such a dork," and I make a mistake, and I want to re-record it. But that's part of it, making mistakes and being human, and the kids like that. So I'm encouraging the educators that I speak to is just maybe at the start of the week in a remote environment, upload a video, build some connections with your learners by showing them your face, asking how they are, maybe even saying how you're coping in this environment, because we've got challenges as well. If you can do that, then you're setting yourself up to, you're kind of showing a little bit of vulnerability, and I think kids like that. So that's another tip. One of the things I'm seeing and hearing online from, we got schools closing down all over the place and going through the motions and not having any experience or probably good enough preparation, is that they're bombarding their kids with work. And I think that's really scary. Like, teachers are thinking, okay, well, I've got 4 hours with them a week, so I need to provide them 4 hours of work. And I think that's a joke, and I think that's rubbish. I think if we're going to do something starting off, especially as we're just moving into these closures, I think focus on one key task per week. If you can do that, make it simple enough for them to achieve, but also at the same time think about some of those. I talk about the SAMR model, where it's really easy to substitute things in, but I don't know if that's a good idea. And if we're just going to focus on one key task a week, let's look at some of those higher order thinking skills. Let's have the kids creating something. Let's have them analyzing and evaluating things, doing some really good thinking on one key task. And I think you're going to see kids get a lot of small wins. And it's like when we onboard somebody to a video game or a platform or a piece of software, you want them to have small wins. When they have small wins, they keep stacking those wins. Early success, and they're more motivated and more engaged to keep pushing ahead. Because if this goes 6 months, 3 to 6 months, we're going to be facing, significantly greater challenges than trying to record a weekly video. We're going to have a really good think about some of those things. So, student guidelines and expectations, clear learning outcomes and success criteria, a weekly video. Some people will be doing daily videos, and that's cool if you've got the time and the skills. And then focus, drill down on one key task and have them working towards that. I think, to me, that's what an ideal learning week in a remote and online environment would look like.
Yeah, I think you're right. There seems to be this tendency to do lots of things, which might be making this more difficult than it needs to be. And I think if you really thought about it, the kids are probably going to have less time than, like, they're going to be at home, with their family and all the other challenges that are happening in their day-to-day lives. They're probably not going to be feeling 100%. They're going to be overwhelmed, and life is going to be like that for a lot of people. And the assumption that, all right, we do 4 hours of face-to-face time, let's load up 4 hours of work for them, is just, we need to change the expectations for sure. And the whole less is more thing here, I really think applies. So in saying that, like, obviously the delivery part and like having some clear expectations and making sure that teachers that are working with the same students probably coordinate with each other, like they're not just on their own pockets and not speaking. Do you think there's some reason and logic behind why you should have some sort of community element to the back of all this work that's going on, whether that's a light conversation, chat, like video, whatever, where people can actually interact?
Well, you think about why kids come to school. I guarantee the majority of students that we have in our classrooms, before they're there to consider learning, they are there to connect with their peers and their friends and catch up and build relationships. And as teachers, what we do, relationships is really at the forefront of everything we do in the classroom. It's relationships. It's about the people that we work with. So we need to try really hard to find a way to create some sort of meaningful community online. And that's obviously really, really hard, but there are ways to do that. And, there's things like Google Classroom, there's Edmodo, there's Facebook groups. We need to provide an opportunity that students can reach out both to the teacher but also to their peers, and still have that banter, still have that dialogue, still have some of those really great connections that they'd normally get in the classroom, because you're taking that away from them. And when we talk about the well-being of our students and some of the things that is kind of scary in teenagers at the moment, and mental health, mental illness, I believe we are going to see, and don't get me wrong, I'm no expert here, but I believe we will see a rise of issues relating to that disconnection, that removal from routine and what they're comfortable with.
Yeah. I mean, we have the tools available. These communities come together organically. The students are probably in them themselves. So I think any sort of remote learning that is being provided by a school, they should think about what's the ingredient they're going to leverage that has that in it. And it could be quite light, and it might be fully featured and more synchronous, like real-time conversation type stuff. But I think at least some sort of asynchronous element is probably a good starting point there. Yeah. So, I mean, we've talked about some of the inherent good framework elements, I think you might say, like underpinning type things. What are some of the common tools that people might beginning to explore that might let them get their content out into the world on a very simple scale, and then sort of rolling up from there?
I think as teachers, we've got to be familiar with some sort of screen recording application. There's Snagit, Screencast-O-Matic, Screencastify. There's all of these things that are really, really simple to use, often just a Chrome extension. But you've got to be comfortable being able to open that, record your screen, know how to save it, upload it to a cloud, and be able to share it. I think that along with some sort of collaborative document system such as Google Docs or OneNote or anything like that, I think that's the bare minimum of what we need to be considering to be at least remotely successful in this new environment that people are finding themselves in. If you can do that, then that's great, and that can lay some of the foundation, and then you can start looking at other things that are out there. One tool that I'm thinking about using, should we go down this path, is the video review app by TechSmith, where you can so your audience are mainly physical educators, so I could go out there, perform a skill incorrectly, upload that, I'll get a link, I can share that with my students, and they can click into that, and then they can generate dialogue based on the video. I might set some questions, I might have them looking at identify weaknesses or strengths in that skill movement, and then this dialogue down the side is just generated where kids jump in, they can make comments, they can reply to other people. So moving away from, I guess, probably that substitute out of the CMR model, where we're just replicating what we'd normally do in a classroom with a pen and a paper, to modifying it and augmenting it a little bit to get some more benefit out of that, and to pull in a little bit more critical thinking and all of those really good collaborative and communication skills that we like our students to be leveraging.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've got the opportunity now because we're leveraging the digital space by the nature of this scenario.
Yeah, and one thing, I spoke to a staff group today, and I was basically saying to them, we're not bound by the four walls of our gym or classroom anymore. Like what we can achieve now is significantly greater than what we can do in a classroom or a gym space where nobody's connected unless they have a device on them. We're moving into a space where the only way to engage with you as the teacher in this learning is to have a device and be connected. And when you have those two things or three things, a teacher, the device, and a connection to the internet, honestly, you can achieve anything. And I think that's really exciting.
Absolutely. Like, looking at it from that perspective, you can't help but think that there is a huge opportunity here. And I heard someone saying the other day that things probably won't go back to the way they were in many ways in our lives. And that sort of happened after some major world events like 9/11. It was never the same when you went through the airport, was it? It was, that changed. What's going to change in education potentially based on this recent events? Like, I think there could be some big silver linings in this.
Well, we know from, if you're not in New Zealand, a New Zealander or a Kiwi, in 2011, we had some pretty big earthquakes where basically a whole city got leveled to the ground almost. And we had schools who had no classroom for 7-8 weeks. We had Like literally, we had schools sharing a campus, and they would work from 7 a.m. till 12 a.m. And then they would have to exit out one side of the school, so the next school would come in, and they would work from 1 until 5 p.m. in the afternoon. So we had teachers that just had to embrace digital technology before schools really were. And what we saw
Mhm.
from that was those teachers in Canterbury, they kind of became the pioneers of digital technology, and that just spread like wildfire throughout our country. So I think what we're
Yeah.
going to see here is teachers understanding or being prepared to embrace online learning, and see some of the potential and the value there. And I think that can only be good for society and for education, I think, to be able to, you know, I think, to me personally, being connected all of the time and having access to students and content, to me, I think that's great and amazing. Some teachers would disagree, but I think we're heading down this path where we're going to be using technology, and creating connections around the world a lot more than, say, we are now, when we haven't had to embrace an online teaching space.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a choice up until this point, hasn't there? Like
Yeah, there has.
you've got the keen people, the early adopters, the people that want to run with it, and there's been some great stories, and you advocate and you sort of are the pioneer behind that in the phys ed space. But for a lot of people, the majority, you might even say, they have never had to even consider it, and
And
maybe
that's
they've
fine,
had
and that's
yeah.
fine. That's all power to them. But like you're saying, this is opening up, I guess, a point in time where it's not really going to be a choice anymore, because we're going to move down this, and you're just going to have to embrace it, or jump out of the profession, maybe.
Yeah, it's pretty wild, that's for sure. So where can people connect with you if they've got some more questions just around, not necessarily tools and strategy, because you'll see a million things around that, online, but more of the deeper thinking that sort of goes behind this approach.
Yeah, there's probably a few ways to contact me in different areas. If you want to consider what I guess a successful online learning platform could look like, there's mystudyseries.co.nz. You can head along there and get in touch with me through there. I also have a podcast, the Augmented Learning podcast, and you can access that at augmentedlearning.co.nz. We have a couple of free courses on there as well. It's a course, an intro course to flipped learning, intro course to gamification. So those are all available for free. And then I guess on Twitter, NZPE Teacher is my Twitter handle. Those are probably the best ways to get in touch, and also see some of the things that I do on this, I guess, this blended learning environment.
Yeah, sweet. Awesome, man. I look forward to seeing what's next. And if I have any questions, I'll be sure to reach out. I know you're my go-to person when it comes to this space. And yeah, I really appreciate your time on the show today.
No, I appreciate your kind words and all the help you give me too, mate. So that's
Awesome, man.
thank you so much.
Speak soon.
All right, cheers, mate.